that won't kill you as much as
Just smoking will kill you?
smoking will. That's how carcinogenic it is. I'm telling you, we are living in America's simulated reality. Guns are no problem.
But
if you don't do the biohack of doing an ice bath every morning, you're going to die of cancer. Guns, we are fine with.
yeah.
So, I think. What do you think? I think we can start talking and see what comes up. So you have read and written and thought a lot about the centuries from the 15th to the 18th, if I'm not.
Yes.
That's mainly your focus area.
Yes.
So, and in that, one of the things that I want to ask is that you have part of the Bhakti movement happening then. And I'm so intrigued by how the Bhakti movement could be so deeply personal, but so intensely political at the same time.
Yes.
I find it fascinating, especially for today's world, because podcasts, Twitter, Instagram are just very similarly that way. They are intensely personal opinions, whatever. Like Instagram doesn't even need you to make a status. Even if you're writing something, nobody's really reading it. It's just a picture or something. So it's deeply personal, but at the same time, I'm now going back to Bhakti movement. It could be so intensely political and subversive. So could you give us a little bit of idea of how that came to pass and what do you think?
I mean, one way to understand Bhakti is to see it. So one of the ways that we consume Bhakti today is our everyday rituals, right? So we are actually in the Bhakti age has somehow been the last of the religious movements, so to speak, in the sense that anything that you remember from or see around the world today in terms of we going to the temples and we offering our agarbattis and offering flowers or offering prasad are all the ramifications that happened in the Bhakti age. Technically, yes.
Okay.
And somehow the religious movement has stopped there, as I said. But how do we understand Bhakti? I mean, there's a preface to that, right? So we have apparently, Hinduism has moved from its Vedic age. The Vedic age was in many ways the time when you did not have the image of God, right? So, so the elemental age. So in the Vedic age, you worshipped the fire, the element of fire, the element of rain, the element of light, just ushas and all of that. But the Bhakti age is crucial because that is the time when you have, in one move, a rebellion against the orthodoxy. That is, you're saying that God cannot be, and this is what happens in the post-Vedic age. What happens is there is a priestly class who mediates the relationship between the human and the God, right?
Yeah.
In the Vedic age, actually, the human was not looking up to God as an extravagant force. What humans had the power of was they could summon the gods. They could chat with the gods. They could, if you performed an Ashwamedha Yajna, you were essentially asking the gods to come down and sanctify you or some of that sort. So slowly what happened is you had one class of people who took control over those ritual spaces.
Right.
And that is the Brahmins, who were now more powerful and more, who had the ability to speak the language, which is Sanskrit and so on. So now Bhakti in the starting circa 1000, but we'll come to that. If you ask me later on, we can come the details of it.
Sure.
But what happens in Bhakti is the individual comes to the center, the forefront of religious duties. That is that the individual now denies the power in the clutches of the priestly class and says, I can again summon up my own God. And that summoning up my own God does happen in a way that you're praying to the God becomes your consort, your lover, your brother. So it's a transformation of that elemental God into a familiar sort of a God. And
Personal
these,
God.
yes, the personal God. And these people inevitably belong to various castes. It could be a Brahmin, but it could be also a what is called quote unquote Shudra. It could quote unquote be an untouchable. And these people, in a sense, lots of scholars have read it as a sort of a rebellion, force of rebellion, as I said, Gale Umbet and others. But these were also people who had faith in the God. In other words, what I'm trying to say is they were composing poetry, that they were aware of poetic meters, and they were bringing in their folk knowledge. I mean, agrarian songs were sung and gods became important. So it's a conflation of both a certain kind of personal devotion. At the same time, it is also a social movement. And I wouldn't want to call it social movement without qualifying it. I mean, it's not the kind of social movement as the OBC movements of the 90s, of course. But this is a conscious movement. That is that you know that you're fighting against some people who have taken control of your God. So, and yes, you're right. It does seem like a possibility of today's, what do you call, the social media, where you are churning out individual opinions and the language of that opinion is inevitably sort of decided somewhere else.
Right.
You know, like the hashtags are not decided by individuals. They're decided by a bunch of technocrats.
At the same time, it's also deciding the language.
Yes.
To a certain extent.
So it's that give and take.
Give and take. Like which you were talking about during the Bhakti movement.
Yes.
Like
So-
within the Vedic fold, within the Vedic Brahminical fold,
Yes.
it was also supplying some kind of information to the Vedic Brahmin fold and also taking cues from it.
Yes.
If I'm
Yes.
Is that-
And it was formulating the gods as accessible gods.
Accessible.
It was formulating the social scape as accessible to everybody. I mean, Meera could, for example, access the space of Krishna. And Meera's love with Krishna is, for example, breaking away from the patriarchal marriage, which was the norm of the time. So Meera loving Krishna was essentially celebrating what you might call an extramarital affair, which is called parakya, right? So, and that celebration was legitimate within the fold of bhakti because that was a way in which she could validate that feeling by creating the image of God. I mean, that's one way of reading it. A lot of feminists have read it as that. But I would argue that, and people have argued this also, and this is nothing new, is that it's also showing that the woman can take the place of a high priest
right.
and consummate with the god in her poems and in her dance, you know.
Right.
Which when Shubhalakshmi sings about Meera, people are joyous about it. But Victorian morality would call it something else. You know? So there's that.
Also, like somewhat close to modern day morality would also call it out of place to a certain extent.
And that is why this primal fear of the middle classes. They want to appease to God, but they're also frightened that you will go too far into...
Too far, wow. Yes, yeah.
And thereby you have people like, I'm forgetting the name of the Odia actor, the guy who became Radha. I'm forgetting his name. I think it's some Ponda, Sriram Ponda.
Oh, did Sriram Ponda sometime become Radha?
Yeah, he became Radha and he left the fold of Grihastha house.
Oh, yeah. He became one of the, you were saying in real life.
Yes. In real life.
Yeah. In real life, he is Nitya Chaitanya.
Yes.
That's his name, Swami. And
yes.
With the Munger school.
So there is that element that the middle class can't understand that trespassing, that exceeding of limits. So bhakti is that excess, but bhakti is also Bhikari Bada, who stays in the middle class genre, but is providing you a certain kind of other experience. So bhakti is a very beautiful experience, and I think a largely unanswered realm. It's an uncharted territory for a lot of people. So bhakti is all these things.
Bhakti, would you say that when I hear you speak so beautifully about what bhakti is kind of, how it's transacting, would you say it's the first kind of culturally, maybe not the first, that's difficult to ascertain, I'm sure, but one of the major places where the public sphere is being built in the sense of people talking about themselves, the Habermasian kind of public sphere which is coming to play, or do you think that it's too much too soon that we are talking about?
No, I think one can argue that it is what. So there are a couple of ways to look at this. One way to look at it is that what is religion, right? I mean, when we say religion in today's world, what is broadly understood is it's a set of codes and rules, and we must be proud of that set of rules and codes. Now, well and fine. So far, so good. But religion is, and I will come to the facts about religion and other things, but let's use religion nominally here.
Yeah.
This space of God and belief to God or supernatural or mystical powers can be seen as an ossified category, but it has never been so. It has always been a realm of debate, discussions, agreements, non-agreements. For example, look at the Vedas, for example. The Rig Veda tells you one thing about creation. The Upanishads tell you whole different things about creation. So, but when it comes to bhakti, you get a plurality of voices. That is, the bhakti for the first time is a place, or not for the first time, but we can nominally say it's for the first time. You have a very divergent number of voices. You have voices of if you're talking about in the Odia context, you have a voice of the Jagannath Das, who is a Brahmin priest's son, who has spent his time in Puri reading Sanskrit text. But you also have somebody called Balaram Das, who is a Shudra poet. So in that sense, you have a diversity in this place. And it is a public sphere. In fact, it's not going to be a misnomer to say it's a public space, because what are the two major qualifications of being a public space? One is that it must deal with issues more than individual. That is, it's not going to deal about if Avinash wants to have breakfast or dinner, but it's going to say, as Avinash as a human, does he have the right to have breakfast or dinner? In the same way as French Revolution did, for example, if we take that as the beginning, or Athenian democracy, which Aristotle wrote about. So the first fact is that it must talk about more than humans,
right?
Which, again, Immanuel Kant talked about. And the second thing is it must have a language to talk about rights. That is, it must have either a legal language or it must have a social language. Both of these criteria are qualified in Bhakti. That it is talking about more than human, individual, and that it has a language which is social. That is, that it arbitrates between caste hierarchies in India. Broadly, Bhakti talks about the caste hierarchies, social, because it's not talking about an individual. And it talks about rules and regulations. So sometimes it can say that lower castes must imbibe Krishna Bhakti because it is the topmost goal, like the Brahmins. Or it can say that, it can say the exact opposite. It can say that the lower castes, by the virtue of what they are already loved by God. So it could be any of this. Any historical event occurs within the social landscape where there is a push and a pull effect. Or in other words, there is a way in which the larger social landscape, which is the dominant ideology, creates and helps lay out the ramifications of this social event called Bhakti. Now, I would not say that Bhakti as an event itself had surpassed Vedic Brahmanism and the dominance of Brahminical ideology. It would be a far-fetched thing to say that. But as a scholar, what we are interested to find when you're studying 15th to 18th century are two things again. One is you are interested to locate the ways in which the dominant ideology is not the only ideology. That is to say, that this is again it's actually a very Marxist way of looking at things, which is there are three ways to look at it, which is dominant, residual, and emergent. So you're looking at the dominant ideology, which is the Brahminican ideology, perhaps, let's say perhaps for the moment. But then there is the residual and the emergent, which means that the dominant allows you certain kinds of resistance. Because there is, as anyway, if you increase the school fees, students are going to rebel, right? So, or parents are going to rebel. So it's that dominant hierarchy which propels this resistance. And this resistance happens in the tone of the dominant, because that is the established code of conduct, right? And thereby, Bhakti emerges as a force of resistance to that. But at the same time, Bhakti is also a space which is working below or parallel to this dominant ideology, in the sense sometimes it has no relation with it, in the sense that it's finding a way to talk about a love which has no space in the Brahminical ideology, because the Brahminical ideology pushes you to...
This is, by the way, the Brahminical ideology trying to drown your voice. They're everywhere, brother.
No.
Yeah, so,
But the Brahminical ideology tries to wash it out, wash this entire logic. And sometimes, at some point, what it does is it co-opts bhakti. Because, and this is the beauty of dominant forces. What they do is they take the residual into themselves and they propel it. So that is what I'm saying. So what you see today, when people worship gods in their little spaces allocated inside their homes, I'm curious how many of them even know the radical potentialities of what they're doing. I'm unsure as to how many of them know the radical potentialities of enunciating Lakshmi Purana when they do it in their homes today. Because what they have done to it is they've made it a part of that ideology which it was against. And this is what happens when history loses touch with life.
fair point.
So
It was that itself, those itself were incredible goals
Yeah.
to accomplish for what must have been the centuries before that, which was very difficult to make God personal, especially with the stick of liberation and the gyan and esoteric practices, which were almost inaccessible to a lot of people to even understand the language, to know what to do. What I'm trying to ask is that how limited was the Bhakti movement to poets, to scholars, to thinkers, and how was in the centuries that you are specializing in, how prevalent was it within, and what were the practices that were there within the people?
No, this is a very fair and important question. In fact, it's actually a very good question in the sense that it was actually limited. And this is also what we have to understand, that so Bhakti has, again, as a social scientist, if you look at it, and I'm just making a division between a social scientist and a religious practitioner, which I'm not. If I'm looking at it as a social scientist, what happens? So there is the broad, overarching, dominant Sanskrit world, which is unapproachable to a large vast of people. Now, nobody spoke Sanskrit in their homes. So Sanskrit might be the language of the cosmopolis, which is a cosmopolitan language. But Sanskrit was not something that you spoke at home. I mean, you have a wife, so you're not speaking to your wife in Sanskrit. You're not speaking to somebody who brings you your food or who is bringing you your, and these are quote-unquote lower castes, You're not speaking to them in Sanskrit. So anybody who knew Sanskrit inevitably knew at least one more language, depending on the regional landscape. But now this regional language was not apparently literary. It's the same way as,
Right.
you speak English, but you also speak Odia, or you speak Hindi, or you speak Bengali, So these languages were then operating at the level below Sanskrit, and Sanskrit was the hegemonic language. But the people who spoke these different languages also had a culture. Now these cultures intermingled with Sanskrit, and showed themselves in the Sanskrit domain in a specific way. Of course, it couldn't hog the limelight. It was always at the fringes of it. I mean, and what happens 1000 CE is that you have these languages coming up and becoming literary languages, regional literary languages. And thereby, who wrote in these languages then? So, it was inevitably, at least in the Odia context, it was inevitably a person who knew Sanskrit and this language who operated on these planes. That is that Jagannath Das, the Odia Mahabharata Kruta Korchati, the Jagannath Das who created the Odia Mahabharata, Odia Bhagavata, who quote-unquote translated it, was very well aware of Sanskrit. So he read the Sanskrit texts. He read the commentaries on Bhagavad Purana. After doing so, he translates that for the layman. This man for whom he is translating does not know the theoretical and the philosophical debates which are going on in the Bhagavad Purana, the Sanskrit text. So, making an esoteric text accessible to a larger mass runs many dangers. One is, of course, simplification. So people, the Brahmins, call it Tenli Bhagavata. That is the other words to say that it is a lower caste Bhagavata. So nobody should read it. Sanskrit Bhagavata is the classic. It's the cult text. You can't read these.
Mothership.
You can't read these arbitrary translations.
Right.
So Odia was not a language that was looked in good eyes because it was not a good language. I mean, how could it be? Sanskrit is the language. But the question might arise that how did Odia become a good language? Now that's something else to think about. I mean, what happened 1500 years since or 800 years since? Where are we? 500 years actually.
Is it also, sorry to interrupt you, but is that story or that history also coinciding with the history of how Odisha or Odiyas turned from people with a rich regional culture to a distinct regional identity? Is that part of the...
Yes. But for that, we need to jump into the 19th century. What happens is between the 15th and the...
Let's stay here and then go
to the 19th century. Because between the 15th and 17th century, remember the first work that sort of reeks of Odia-ness is Sarala Mahabharata.
Right.
And between 1000 to 1500, we don't have anything in Odisha, is what they say. There's a 500 period gap.
Right.
So you have, if I can just brief you up, so you have the Chauryapadas, which are the Buddhist texts, which are claimed, I'm sure you know, Haraprasad Sastri from Calcutta found these manuscripts in Nepal.
Right, wow.
So you have Chauryapadas. Chauryapadas are texts which are written by Buddhist saints. Beautiful music. Some of them have been composed in Odia classical form, or what is called, not the music form is not yet classical, but what is the Odissi form of quote-unquote music. So the Chauryapadas are a very debated, and I'm not going to get into that, that's a whole controversial area. They are claimed by the Bengalis as the primogenitor of their, as the prime the sort of space where their literature began. The Assamese claim that their literature began from there, and the Odias claim that their literature began from there. So there's a dispute that has been going around for a long time. But let's leave Chauryapadas. That's 1000, circa 1000. Yeah. So then 1500 is when Sarala Mahabharata emerges, which is again a reworking of the Mahabharata, which was written in Sanskrit by Vyasa. And then you have, since Sarala Mahabharata, you have the what is called the indigenous or Indic Odia version of doing things. So from then on, you can track a lineage of what is Odia. But we'll come to it when we talk about 19th century, how people dealt with it and all that. Yeah.
This is interesting because you use the word that Sarala Mahabharata is the first time we can say that the text is really in Odia, having some kind of... And so it begs the question, at least in my mind, is that how is the redacting or editing by Sarala Mahabharata makes it more of a local version than just a translation?
Okay, no, so it's Odia, of course, because it's written in Odia.
Yeah.
But it's also Odia for many other historical reasons. One is that Kapilendra Deva usurped the throne. And you have the first Odia Gajapati, or what is called the Odia Raja, the beginning of the Odia dynasts. I mean,
there's the Khorda dynasty coming in.
Yeah,
sorry,
which is
the Khorda dynasty is the Ramachandra. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a usurpation of the throne from Bhanudeva IV, which is so the Gongos go now.
Right, the Gongos go.
The Gongos go and the Kapilendra comes up.
Samavanshis and
the
Suryavanshis.
The Suryavanshis come up, yes. So you have the Gongos going, and he patronizes certain kind of Odia alongside Sanskrit and other languages. And then you have the writing of Sarala Mahabharata. He's a patron poet. He's a Sudra Muni. He writes.
And this is the beginning of the 16th century?
This is 15th. This is mid-15th.
Yeah, okay.
Mid-15th. Yeah, this is about mid-15th. And this creates... So, none of these texts are translation because translation is a Western word.
Right.
And translation means staying true to the essence. But these are... Let's call them retellings as A.K. Ramanujan said once, the 300 Ramayanas in the context of that. So so the best way to understand it is this. You have a story. A story is in the air. You know about Rama, you know about Krishna, you know about Arjuna, you know about Jara. These are stories percolating in the air. What people like Sarala do is they capture that air and they render it in a local space. Now, how it is in the air? Of course it is in the air because the mythology is formed around that, right? So everybody knows about these stories. And Sarala renders it in Odia. And by rendering it in Odia, what it does is he's looking at the locale around him, right? So when he's placing the I mean, he's looking at the people around him, the specific kind of Odia, or not Odia, the specific kind of Adivasis or indigenous people that he's seeing take space inside that. Like for example, women are more feisty in Sarala Mahabharata. They are not toning down and taking the curses that the men are throwing at them. I mean, Ganga, for example, is a very feisty woman in the text. So you have these ramifications, and these ramifications happen everywhere. I mean, if you look at, for example, the Jayanta Mahabharata, in Jayanta Mahabharata, you have, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows the Eklavya story, right? So according to Vyasa's Mahabharata, the Eklavya story goes this way, that Drona is the guru, and the Pandavas are learning archery from him. Eklavya is a Nishada, not a royal blood. Thereby, he cannot learn how archery works. But he wanted to learn archery, created an idol of Drona, learned archery. And one day, a dog was going around, and then he put 7 arrows in one shot into the dog's mouth. And the dog goes to Arjuna, and Arjuna says, "Brilliant, who is this archer? Who can do this?" And then he finds out that it's Nishada. And he says, "Oh, well, you can do it." And then Drona is in worry. And Drona goes back and asks Eklavya for Guru Dakshina. "You learned from me, give me the Guru Dakshina." And Eklavya says, "I will." Cuts his thumb, asks for his thumb is cut, right thumb is given to, and his archery is gone. However, if you look
Days of shooting dogs, that's what it is.
Yes, but if you read the text, we are not empathizing with the dog. The text is actually very ambivalent about whose side he's taking.
Right.
Vyasa takes a very interesting domain. I mean,
that's a very important point.
Right. So Vyasa is curious to not take any sides, but we do see that there is some mention of how terrible the act is.
Right.
But we don't get any closure.
Right.
But look at a few centuries later, the Jayana Mahabharata. When the Jainas composed their own Mahabharata, they say that Arjuna was the one who asked this guy, Eklavya, to cut his thumb and give. And this, of course, Wendy Doniger writes in her book in much more detail. I'm just paraphrasing it. And in the Jaina text, the dog becomes very central. Because you see, the Jainas are a non-quote-unquote violent race, or religion, or whatever that is, right? So the dog becomes very crucial. You can see how one mythological event can be looked from various different perspectives.
Right.
And these perspectives are shaped by the allegiances that you have.
Right. And you're saying that Sarala Das writing the Mahabharata did accomplish that to a great extent.
Yes. Anyone who retells a mythological tale from the Sanskrit has their own take to it. I mean, for example, Gandhi would later on come and talk about the dharma of Yudhishthira in a specific way, right? Or for example, Tilak will look at Krishna's dharma as an archer. So he will militarize Gita. So you have these versions, and Dayanand Saraswati would want to take us back to the Vedas. So there's a lot of, I'm jumping to 19th century, but
obviously you take a lot.
Yeah.
You take what you want.
But essentially what I'm trying to say is that it is a religion of contradictions. And Bhakti typifies that contradiction. Hinduism, quote unquote Hinduism, has always been a religion of contradictions, and Bhakti exacerbates that contradiction because it gives you so many plural perspectives that you really can't chain them into one thing and say, this is the thing that I'm looking at. It diversifies the whole thing. And of course, Sarala Mahabharata has more allegiances towards, as I said, the Sabaras, the Jara Sabara, who is the focal point of that. I mean, I can go on and on about it, which is how the Aryans are not given so much due. There is a certain way in which the non-Aryans come in view. I mean, so the Jara Sabara is a non-Aryan identity. So you have a certain allegiance to them. So it and it's a Shundra doing it. Don't forget that. It's Namoi Tumo Charane, and he mentions in the first line actually that I'm a Shudra. Now,
and Shudra Muni was his
moniker.
Muni being the subcaste.
The Muni is the, in a sense, Rishi. I mean, the one who thinks, monastic. I mean, I think so. That's the thing. But that's the moniker that he uses, Shudra Muni. So remember, from his caste position, he is rendering this Itihasa Purana, because Mahabharata is an Itihasa Purana. So, thus it happened. So
where does Geet Govindam fit in all of this? Because one important point that I remembered, very discursive reading, is that was apparently completely aghast with the kind of explicitness that Geet Govindam had. So I just want you to locate how these different threads were working even within themselves. Like Sarala Das, I think at Geet Govindam there is explicit references to lovemaking, to, kind of what we would consider cheating in a relationship, people going outside the conventional fold. But was it also a response against Brahmanism, but also a response against, like it was trying to find a center? Was it that or no? Not at all.
I mean, Gita Govinda is a 12th century text.
Yes.
Mahabharata has a very difficult purpose to achieve, right? It's not. Mahabharata's purpose is to show the contradictions. Okay, let's begin from Dharma. Mahabharata typifies the understanding of Dharma.
Right.
So, and what is Dharma? There is something called the Swadharma, and there is something called the Jati Dharma. So, there are many kinds of dharmas. Dharma essentially is the right way to live life, the right conduct of life, right? And that right conduct of life is designated and comes to you by virtue of your subject position. So if you are a Kshatriya, the right dharma for you apparently is to fight, hold arms or whatever. But if you're a Nishada, it's not so. If you're a woman, it's something else. If you're a husband, it's something else. So all these elements of one human's responsibilities are clashing with each other in Mahabharata. So Mahabharata is truly the space from where we draw our ethical and moral sureties. That's not the case with the Gita Govinda.
Right.
That's not the case. For Gita Govinda, I'm not sure. I don't know much about Gita Govinda, so I shouldn't be speaking more about it. But if you're putting Sarala Mahabharata in comparison to Gita Govinda, maybe, perhaps there's a way in which he is setting the record straight. But I would suggest Gita Govinda is a Sanskrit text.
Because it also precedes a time where I think like the Bhomakaras in the 8 and 10, even before that, predating before that, there is a history of at least non-Brahminical religions being at the center of at least at play at Odisha, this region. And a lot of other things also being, for instance, I think the Temple Chronicles do not talk so highly about the Kesari dynasty, where they think that things are way too heterogeneous. A lot of Aryan and non-Aryan languages, mores, customs are mixing together. I was wondering how much of a role did the Bhakti movement or the Bhakti poets play in creating a center within them. Do you see what I mean? Like breaking away from resisting the Vedic fold, but also kind of in a way solidifying their position to a certain extent. Do you think, or it's a complete mistake?
No. I mean, yeah, that's true. It's true that the Bhakti movements actually legislate in a certain, in today's context. Right. In today's context, if you see the Bhakti, okay, so what is the Odia Bhakti movement? It's the Pancasakas, right?
Right.
The Pancasakas are collectively read as one unit. But the Pancasakas are not one unit. They are separated by 400 years. Prabhat Mukherjee, in fact, couldn't finish his work. He died before that. But he had this brilliant work on Chaitanya movement in Odisha and how that galvanized the beginning of the Bhakti movement in Odisha, right? So you have Chaitanya coming from Nodia and settling down here with his Gaudiya Vaishnava.
Bengali is creating a lot of
problems here. Also, in fact, the Bengalis, Chaitanya's entrance created a whole lot of problems, right? I mean, a whole lot of...
All these Bengalis coming to Puri Puri has a vast history of Bengalis.
And it galvanized the situation in a specific way. What it did is it changed the trope of doing religion, and that is why it offended a lot of these the Pandits, the Brahmins. But what is crucial for us to see is that the Pancasakas are a whole diverse range of people. So again, coming back to Jagannath Das and Balaram Das, because I'm obsessed with them for the last 2 months.
And that's a very good, I mean, you were making a point earlier, not on camera, but making like contrasting them so beautifully as to how, especially how Lakshmi Puran and Bhagavad Puran achieve probably some similar things, but also subvert each other and the big daddy of
the Vedic tradition.
Patriarchy.
But there is also an element where you have something called the Sunyavad, which is a real misnomer. I mean, the Sunyavad is a specific kind of occurrence that happens only in Odisha. Or I wouldn't say only in Odisha, but that retelling, that rendering of that Shunyavad is specific and unique to us. Because it is not, I mean, Bhima Bhoi, for example, if you listen to any of his songs, Raghunath Panigrai actually sings them beautifully. Now, what is Shunyavad? I mean, this Shunyavad was also against Olek Dharma, which is the Olek Dharma, was against the Jagannath temple.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it. That they attacked.
Yes, in the late 19th century, they attacked.
1881.
Because they conceived of God as the Shunya. And remember that this God as Shunya is not a new concept. I mean, of course, it is a Buddhist concept. But Buddhist concept does not look at Shunya in the same way. The Buddhist concept is much tied with action. But this is also a certain kind of Upanishadic, where the God is absent.
Right.
The absent God.
Absent God.
Reminds you of Christianity. So,
how so?
You can't formulate the image of the God like the
I get what you mean.
Like the monotheistic religions,
like the monotheistic Judeo-Christian religions, also Islam, the
Judeo-Christian ones, Judaism as per se. But so this absent God suddenly gets formed,
right?
And this is where we have to see the Sukma and the Sthula, which is why do we need the Rupa? Why do we need God to have a form? When did the idea of the form of a God emerge? Now, those kinds of questions come up, and then you trace them. The form of the God becomes crucial because one way to think of it is, and I think this is a very street smart way of thinking it, is that ଧ୍ୟାନ କରିବାକୁ ଶୂନ୍ୟରେ କଷ୍ଟ ହୁଏ. ତ ଭଗବାନଙ୍କର ଗୋଟେ ଅବତାର ଥିଲେ, form ଥିଲେ, it becomes easier. How do you love a God? How do you love the formless? You can't love the formless. So there's a form allows you a certain kind of tangibility to the God. So bhakti is both that and the intangible. So bhakti balances the tangible and the intangible in a specific way. I'll give you a very small example. Nanak comes to Jagannath Temple Puri and saves Akal Takht.
Wow.
I mean, he in Jagannath finds the Guru.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And Kabir finds the formless, the God which is both the Hindu and the Muslim, the God which is beyond this, like Rumi. He is a very plural God. You can pin him to me. I'm not interested, and of course, as a historian, I would be interested, as a literary historian, I would be interested in his roots. But I'm also interested in all these methods in which he is read. I mean, you have barely gotten any God who can be seen with so many kinds of creative explorations and so many ways in which as he has been. I mean,
such as,
as I said, Kabir, Nanak, you have Salabega. I mean, the question about him being historical character or not has been always there, but still.
How does Salabega, let us say, at least,
the
imagination sees Jagannath? Which is
all of them see him as a Patita Pavana, as somebody who will save them, because that is the trope of bhakti, right? The trope of bhakti is you are the dasa. That is, you are the subservient to Lord, and ଆପଣ ଭଗବାନଙ୍କୁ ଗାଳି ଦେବେ, ଭଗବାନଙ୍କୁ ବ୍ୟଥିତ କରିବେ, ଭଗବାନଙ୍କୁ ଗଞ୍ଜଣା ଦେବେ. All kinds of these things. Like,
where does Gali Deva, sorry, I'm thinking on another thread because this is becoming so interesting. Where does Gali Deva become so, kind of, what are the roots to that? When does that happen? When does the profane enter the sacred so interestingly, especially so intimately with God?
In fact, the profane has always been part of the sacred. That is that you're seeing the God as a living entity, right? So you're seeing him as a sort of and this is again going back to bhakti. One example, of course, that comes to the top of my head is when Jagannath Das writes about the birth of Krishna, and I need to these are all becoming pockets of replies. But when Jagannath Das understands the birth of Krishna, unlike the Bhagavad Purana, Krishna is born to living parents, and the familial drama is operating there. That is, Jagannath Das is telling you that the wife is talking to the husband and saying, I am pregnant. The husband is worried that how will my wife deliver the baby. So there is a way in which he's becoming a ladla boy in a little bit of a
And
family
none of
set.
that, kind of light from the heaven ascended. And
Yeah, no,
none of
it
that.
is happening, but also there is a
Also
familial.
happening,
Yeah.
but there is a
Yeah, the Apsaras are also happy that Krishna is being born. But there's also the familial drama. You have
Right.
the plots
Right.
and times and faces. And thereby God starts becoming more accessible. And this Gonjana Deva, any Bhikari Boda song is about saying that tu to tachalya kariva. You don't want to help me. You're helping everybody else. You're helping Draupadi there. You're helping all these people. What have I done to you? You
Yeah.
come back and help.
And that's also very relatable.
Yeah. And the Odiyas have a very distinct fatalism in that sense.
And Eastern Indians love to complain.
Yeah.
Tuta dekha do. You meet somebody, you go to their house,
Yeah.
and you take the trouble of driving 20 kilometers and reach there.
First thing
you do that. Tuta ajikali dekha do.
Yeah.
I came all the way.
So that's part of our culture in a certain sense.
That's where it started.
And thereby you do that with your God also. I mean, you say that I will not try to go to him. But I've left the Dakuni Puri Jaipurni.
Yeah.
I will never take a days off.
Yeah.
One fine day, my mother will push me and I was Dakina.
my God.
So this kind of.
And even when you go, you say Tutta Dakuno. Just to make your point a little.
And you're feeling too hot, and that day you're tired and you don't want to enter the temple. And it's like, Dakila dekha dilani. So there is that element of joy. And I'm not. This is not to say that he's not calling you, or it's not a question of your faith. What I'm trying to say is that the faith is operating on a very humane basis with the God. And that's his speciality. And that comes from this whole trajectory of the God becoming personal. And not only that, but he was not a resistant God. I mean, think of it. The hegemonic Brahmanism has always detested this kind of madness. Chaitanya,
I would think.
Yeah. Chaitanya's dances, Chaitanya's extravagant devotion, where he took control of Radha Shakti took control over him, and he is in joy of union with the Lord in front of him or outside. Of course, created headaches. But what I'm trying to say is, look how steadily today you can't say anything wrong about Chaitanya. Any human being in this part of the world will not say wrong things about Chaitanya. In fact, Chaitanya stands as a monument when you go to the Puri sea beach. Swargadara Chhaka. Chaitanya has a huge image of him dancing there or whatever. So, how did that orthodoxy which so resisted these people now takes control of them?
Co-ops. Smart in many senses.
I mean, Gagan Mein Thal, for example, that whole song by the Guru Gobind Singh. What is this song about? Gagan Mein Thal. Mane, it's like you are like the sun in the sky, and around you are stars twinkling. Where is Jagannath here? But that is Jagannath. He looks at him as a sun in the sky, and beside him are his brothers and sisters, the stars, and that is devotion. He writes that song. So he sees something else in Jagannath. As I said, Salaveva could never enter the temple. Sees something completely different. Dasya Bauri, for example, never entered the temple, saw something completely different. So, who is this God who allows this multiplicity to exist? Why does he not resist multiplicity and say that, no, I am this. You can't see me as anything else. So when Mr. Modi comes to Jagannath temple, it is not for any person who knows history well, it's not surprising. But it's always been. So historically, it's always been. So in the sense that from the 12th century onwards, Jagannath has always been the place that the ruling king of Odisha goes to legitimize themselves. Let's take two examples.
Right from Ananta.
Yes, right from the building of the temple, so to speak, even before that.
Gangadev.
Yes.
Like that's when the Purushottam.
Yes, the 12th century. So he was called the Purushottam. And then later on, let's look at how Kapilendra Deva comes in. Kapilendra Deva is a Nayaka. He's apparently in the army of the Gangas. And he takes over the throne. And I don't know if people of today's generation remember, but this is Govardhan Das also speaking about it in other contexts. But
who's a shout out? I mean, he has passed away.
Yes, Govardhan Das passed away a couple of years ago. He's a brilliant historian.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I feel when I'm talking to you, I feel like you're on your way to admit.
No. He was the man who knew everything. He knew his sources so well. We don't have those sources because that is the problem also in
And
Odia.
such interpretive quality.
Yes,
Such interpretive quality of looking into and
Yeah.
considering so many views. I'm just taking one. You were making a very important point. But Kavanendra Das has been such a tour de force.
Yeah,
in term kinds.
He's a fabulous person, and not only that, we must add that he talked about state formation way before Eric Hobsbawm and Benedict Anderson talked about imagined communities. And he formulated this idea of what was crystallized by Benedict and Eric Hobsbawm as proto-nationalism. He, in fact, perfected that idea, and he called it something else, but not proto-nationalism. So he's been at it for a long time, in the 70s. And he's a fantastic man. But that is what he says. He says that, for example, there's a Janashruti, the folk tale that goes around is that Kapilendra Deva was a rogue, he was a thief, and Jagannath gave dreams to the Ganga dynasty's king, and the Ganga dynasty king didn't have children or whatever, and then he was anointed as a king or whatever. Now this Janashruti, he dissects it, and he says that this is a Janashruti created to legitimize the rule of the ruler. And the fact that this Janashruti is, and of course this logic of Kapilendra Deva declaring himself as the Rauta, servant of Jagannath. So all the kings becoming, so we all celebrate Chhera Pohara today and all that. But as a historian, Gaganendranath Das says, and I'm repeating it, so I must repeat also the caveat that he says, that it's not to offend any Odia sentiments. But the historian looks at it in that way, and that is the only way you can look as a materialist. So what he's saying is that the Chhera Pohara is institutionalized in the king who comes next, Purushottam Dev, who comes right after Kapilendra Deva, because he has to serve, because he was also not the legitimate heir. The brother of his could have taken over the throne, thereby in order to sort of get his rule accepted, he becomes even one step lesser, and he says, I will be the sweeper, I will be the cleaner to your temple and to your Aatha and all of that. And that is why during his marriage proposals with the queen of the princess of Kaveri, the king says that I can't give my son to a
person who does the work of a Chanda.
Yeah.
I think
so that means that it was not looked well upon. Yeah. It was not an established tradition, So that's what he says. Right. And that's true. So Lord Jagannath has functioned as a legitimizing force. He's always been at the helm of sanctifying political rule. And it goes back, as I said, it goes back to Chodaganga Deva. Right. And it begins from there. Somebody becomes a Rauta, then one step further, and now by the time the Purushottam and the next lots come, they have become the first of the servants. So the rule happens by Jagannath, and you see Kanchi Kaveri Jagannath or Bodabhadra hi Lodhanti. So now he's also become a military person. Right. So the king is only following the summons of the god, and this is not only unique to Odisha. This is happening in medieval times in Chola Empire. Vaishnava, Vishnu becomes the ruler, and you are the whatever. And this is where the temple, this is where the state aligns with quality. So it's only natural. I mean, Bijay Patnaik, who apparently never went to temples, had to go to Jagannath temple, is what I've heard. I don't know if the history can correct.
Just that it exists as a law. Mm-hmm. Much of what Bijay Patnaik did or did not do exists as like law for public consumption, and sometimes for like a Puran. Yeah. I think we have a Puranic character there in true. Instruct us on what it is to be Odia and what is not.
But every chief minister has gone there, and everybody just has to go there, legitimize their rule, because he's the Odia Moudamani and the king of Odisha truly, and everybody at his service. So that's always been the case.
And is it also the case during how much of this is a center now cutting to like the centuries, through the centuries, even when the Odisha language agitation comes up, is he there? Is he brought up there? And
yes.
Is he kind of thought to be the some kind of center at least?
Yes. In fact, one of the ways in which J.P. Das in his book Desakala Patra actually writes about it, which is translated by Jyotir Naik at the time elsewhere. The way in which Jagannath figures there is, I'm forgetting the dates exactly, but there was I think the 19th century. It has to be the 19th century, after the British took over. There was a case where the king was prosecuted for murder and sent to Kodapani in Andaman.
And he didn't have a successor.
He
Or
had
the successor was very
minor, 4 years or 5 years.
temple administration was.
Yeah, and the British took over the temple administration. Mr. Madhusudhan Das
The
fought
lawyer.
the case. Yeah, from Calcutta. He had studied and come from University of Calcutta, a presidency college, I'm forgetting. I think that was the same thing. And he fought the case, and Surjamani Dev, who was who became the mother of the king, reigned for 17 years or something. Interesting again. Here was a man who converted into Christianity in Calcutta.
That's true. Part of the reason, that's why I was asking you, I had
Yeah.
Madhusudhan Das in mind. As
Yes.
People like Madhusudhan Das. And even before that, the Odisha Association had a lot of people of various origins, especially the much loathed Bengalis, or at least people of Bengali descent, Gaurishankar Ray, and a lot of other people, Jagmohan Ray, I think a lot of people were there. So it was a very eclectic group. Even that group, you were saying, at some point, put Jagannath at the center of it to legitimize the A in some way.
Yeah, I mean, if I finish the story, this is Madhusudhan Das was a Christian man who, quote unquote Christian man, he's sort of converted and he fought the case. And that actually gave him, again, this is taken from the hypothesis of many other historians like Mr. Das and others, is that sort of somehow gave him some legitimacy in the Odia public sphere.
Right.
And you also have...
He was a Firangi Babu before that, educated.
Also Christian. I mean, he's a Christian
that's
man.
I think the subtext, but I think he was also living
in Calcutta.
Western, doesn't know. Yeah. I think he was practicing in Alipur.
Alipur, yes. And my friends tell me that he apparently spoke Bangla in his house.
Bangla in his house. He married a Bengali woman for a longer period. In fact, it was her death which kind of started the entire way in which he came back to Odisha. Yes.
So, no, all these things. And that's one way to look at it, that you have a certain kind of legitimizing force. If you do anything for the temple, that legitimizes your personal and public space in the Pradesh. I think it's a strategic move. I mean, what happened is the maneuver, the bureaucratic maneuver of the British to take control over the temple really created furor. And at that time, you had a civil society member like him. It was a strategic move because you had to save that thing. Because that thing carries that much importance in the Odia public sphere, right? I mean, you can't let it go. So thereby, that created the space. I mean, of course, I'm sure he didn't calculate that he will be a big name after that. But he did know what he was saving or what he was fighting for. That legal battle he knew was...
That's fair. He knew the importance and the position of all this in the play of things and how it would play for him.
Absolutely.
As a person who has converted to Christianity, lived mostly and is kind of a pariah here at that time, professionally, I think.
But I think his Christianity was not a problem per se anyway.
Right.
It wasn't. I mean, Fakir was a Brahmo.
Right.
I mean, of course, in that public sphere at that time, it did matter. But what I'm trying to say is, I'm not pretty sure that he would have done it because he's a Christian. I don't think that would have been the case. I think that modernity came in the form of Christianity for many years, right? And this is only natural that he took over. But other people also, Gopabandhu Das, for example, would talk about going and see, I mean, the national movement in Odisha directed at certain kind of Jagannath Bhakti. Bhakti nohele bhi, Jagannath as the uniting figure. It's always the uniting figure. The Odia Jati has to be united by that since the pre-modern to the modern times. That might have loopholes, but I would say that there's something interesting happening there. He's uniting politically as a landscape, but he's also uniting a religion in that sense. So there are two things happening, and he's an interesting god. That is why anybody who sees him looks interesting and is interesting. So we need to think about that in some ways.
So Fakir Senapati, whom you mentioned, has a very interesting arc in that sense. Like at some point, he is looked at as the anglicized, kind of traitor. In fact, I think he's attacked by Gaurishankar Ray and all of them as being somebody who doesn't know the language or actually writes Odia in a way which is very close to the upper middle class or upper class Bengali script. He also kind of did a lot of translations. I think Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's couple of books.
Mohan is an interesting character for reasons more than one, because he found Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar as his guru.
Right.
And Jiban Charit, I'm also speaking back. But Jiban Charit, but the Jiban Charit's Anubad is called, Gaurishankar Rai publishes in Utkara Deepika a piece, or if I'm not wrong, an article which says that, the Odiyas are now so close to Bangla. They're writing in a language. So what is happening here is this is Sanskritized languages. So it's an upper caste particular usage, as I said, right?
Right.
So they knew Sanskrit. So he knew Sanskrit very well. In fact, our Fakir Senapati was a polyglot. He knew Sanskrit, Persian, Odia, and bit of English.
Right.
I also hear that he could get away with a little bit of Hindustani. I don't know, but I also heard that. But anyway,
Possibly true.
possibly. I mean, he was a mamlatkar
Right.
in the courts. So
Right.
Persian and Hindustani are interacting
Right.
with each other. Nevertheless, we know all 4 languages at least he knew. So the gentleman actually translated things and then got beaten up for it. Literally, he was ransacked. He was said that he is not writing in Odia, and he was shocked. Now, here's a life story. He basically writes in Bangla. He wrote. Oh, I forgot to mention Bangla. Of course, he knew Bangla, and he's publishing in Soma Prakash, which is a Bengali magazine coming up in Bengal. And in his Atmacharita, he writes. There's a, and this is what is painful for him, that he sees. Can we not have Odia in which we can write all these things? He's looking at these Bangla dailies and magazines, and he's saying, wow, beautiful writing. Why can't I write in Odia? Why is nobody reading in Odia, nobody publishing in Odia, and all of that? So then when he's attacked for his Odia, he completely changes course.
Yeah.
And that change of course happens when he tries to induct Deshaja Bhasa
Right.
into this. So there are 3 layers of languages, right? One is the Tadbhava and the Tatsama and then the Deshaja.
Yeah.
So Tadbhava Tatsama is direct taken from Sanskrit. Other is modified from Sanskrit. Deshaja is completely different from the...
So Tadbhava being directly taken from Sanskrit.
Yes.
Sorry, Tatsama.
Tatsama, yes. And
Tatsama
Tadbhava is modification.
Modification.
And Deshaja is the Deshi Bhasa.
Got it.
So he takes Deshaja Bhasha and puts it into the Odia language when he's writing. So that is why you have these original, what is called the Nichhaka Odia Sahitya, which is this truly emblematic of... And remember that he is writing about small villages and life there, and anybody who has read Chha Athgund will see that the text weaves into itself mockery of Sanskrit and English, a mockery of highbrow languages. He is essentially batting for using the ordinary everyday language. So his contribution to Odia language is to create a distinct identity away from Bangla and Sanskrit.
Right.
And that is the Aryan and the non-Aryan mixage. I mean, in the sense that because Odia is an Indo-Aryan language, so he's using certain Desaja Bhasa to make it more varied, or what is called more diverse. So that is his true contribution.
Right.
In that sense, he's
So again, another story from the fringes to the center, because Chavanata, you can't get more center in terms of now what is understood as Odia literature.
Yeah. So
then Chavanata, Guntha, right?
You've taken it to center, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is somebody who's being, kind of, and especially this movement comes in the backdrop of the Odia language agitation, which also comes with the context of resisting Bengali at that.
Yes, and the Bengalis were the supreme sort of enemy in that sense, in terms of the bureaucracies and all of that. But it's also coming in the larger kind of enemy structure, right? You have the Telugus in the south, you have the Hindi-speaking in the other northern western.
That's how the western, also Odia language agitation directs itself to the western here when, Hindi is imposed as the language for the police record and magistrate work and stuff like that.
But the primal battle happens for Fakir Mohan Senapati and Gaurashankar Rai, who are in the coastal belt. It's Bengali. Basically, it rises from this Kanti Chandra Bhattacharya's document, Udi Ekta Bhasha Noy. And then Rajendra Lal Mitra saying that this is also economics. I mean, let's not take it to our sentiments. It's basically economics. It's just that the textbooks will not sell. So they are trying to do this, that.
They're also trying to secure government jobs, because if Bengali does become the mainstay language, they will have a natural advantage. With the bureaucracy, with the and if Odia doesn't make that. But also coming back to Fakir Mohan, why that story arc interests me so much is because it has so much echoes with contemporary circumstances. Because it's Fakir Mohan Senapati is actually redirects. It's through the process of writing Chaumana Ataguntha that actually he reimagines whom to resist. Because he's writing in a probably anglicized and sorry, not anglicized, but in a language which is very close to Bengali, or he's being accused of writing in a
Before Chamana.
before Chana, and he is in fact writing in a language. So he wants to find the authentic language. And the John Beam's articles, he says that he finds it in the Chha language. He says that, I'll not find it with the upper caste languages anymore. I'm looking at the wrong spot.
Yes.
I want to create this authenticity, and then want to go a little subterranean. I want to go to the Chosas, I want to go to the agrarian rural community, and then understand their language. But once he understands the language, his story also changes, because he cannot have urban characters speaking in Chasa language or Desaja language, what he later calls it. But when he is writing the story about an agrarian community, Bengali is no longer, or Bengali language is no longer the enemy. It's the colonial rule which is as a overall enemy.
You're right. Yeah.
And I'll tell you how I think about it right now, which astounds me right now, is that this is the story of, in my view, the parallel which I draw, obviously, is like, I'm again seeing into it. This is my parallel with how the cosmopolitan Odia of the IT generation, of the achieving generation, this middle class Odia, which has done very well, kind of going out of its, let us say, homestead, looked outwardly being cosmopolitan, suddenly made self-conscious and trying to now journey back. But I think it's not, it hasn't found the place where it will find its idiom. So the idiom is now Asmita, for instance, now political Asmita. But that authenticity is difficult to find because you are restricted to that realm. If, and this is hypothetical thinking, if it does find the authenticity, and when it does find authenticity, I hope all these questions, it will probably see the overarching and the more dominant force not being language or other things like with Bengali, and now in this case Tamil or other influences, maybe probably Hindutva be. And this is my visual thinking.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple of things in this question, but the first reading was fabulous. This is a fine way of thinking. It's a literary critic's way of thinking, but I didn't really think of that the way you put it, that once Bengali was out of the way with Desaja, the reality that came to him was the Jomidar.
Yeah.
And it's a fantastic way of looking at it. You're right, if I look at it that way, that once the Desaja, once language is sort of overcome, you find the true enemy lying indoors, which is inside your court, which is the Ranjit Mangaraj. Ranjit Mangaraj, whatever, he's Mangaraj, the guy. You're right. I mean, that's a fantastic way of looking at it. But it's also, Chamana Athakund is also a tale, as I said, about, so there is a beautiful passage there in Chamana Athakund, if I remember rightly. Some woman's beauty, dhobara gote kahara sundarta describe kora hochi. Kiye gote seti Sanskritara di line lekhichandi. He's mocking the way in which Sanskrit celebrates beauty. I mean, the lotus blooms and all of that, and Gojogami. So he's making fun of that, and he's saying this is not contemporary. You have to find new ways to talk about sexuality and erotics and all that. So he's doing that. So he's very smart. So he's aware of that Sanskrit veneer of the upper castes. But at the same time, Shima, he's also translating Bhagavata into Odia, which is a very different kind of Odia. He's a very interesting man. Utkala Brahmanam is an entire satirical tale about he's going around the Hati and all that.
And he rants about how you should be very careful of the Modis taking over businesses in Qatar.
Yes.
I don't know if
and he's also warning us about how Odias are great, and he's sad and all of that. So he's a multifarious personality. He really feels for the Odia language. And he's certain kind of, I would not say chauvinist or supremacist. He's just a guy who was not able to articulate his heart in his language. Now, that is, having taken that into account, what we have done is we have ossified our cultural heritage. And the true search of cultural heritage happens only by being critical.
Right.
And I'm not saying being critical means discarding somebody. I think being critical means to understand who did what, for what reasons and when, and how things can be done in a different way. Like this whole question of the left during the French Revolution were the ones who sat on the left side of the parliament, who opposed the monarchs. The left during the times of Indian independence was the ones who wanted dictatorship of the proletariat and not a governed election, not a democratic quote unquote equal vote, equal election.
Sure.
So the context change. So we have to really change our context and see where do we stand in Odia literature today. Instead of chanting glories, and this is where the word Asmita comes into the picture. What is Asmita?
What is Asmita? That's correct.
Right? I mean,
what do we mean by it and how have we lost it?
I was reading recently the Samvada newspaper, thankfully, and I think Mr. Bijoy Mohanty gives an interesting dynamic to this idea of Asmita. He says it's also coming out of Ahang, but it's also coming out of something else. So what is this Asmita logic? How do we define this logic? Is it, there can be many ways. Is it like the 19th century Hindu Renaissance, which wanted to look into an idealized past?
Right.
That is Orientalist. That there is an idealized past that you can go to. No past is idealized. If you want to go to the Sarala Mahabharata age, you have to face the conflicts of jati. You have to face the conflict of casteism. If you want to go to the Kapilendra Deva age, you have to face the conflict of a usurper of power. People are glorifying these histories. Yeah, I mean, the Asmita has the risk of idealizing a past. But I think I'm also looking at what happens when you... Glorification is always part of everybody's culture. You are always proud of your culture. And that is a true thing. You must be. I am proud of who I am. I am proud of being where I am born, what gods we have and all of that. But I think what I'm saying is that when you try to invent a past which is pure, a past which is... It's an anachronistic thing to say that India existed before 47, for example. India didn't exist before 47.
As a political entity.
As a political entity. So there is no... I mean, so what happens is now we're inventing a race called Odia.
And putting it as far back as we can.
Yeah, but that it was constructed consciously by creating and this is what people get into trouble for saying, is this, that the nationalist phase of any place is about consolidating identities. The nationalist historian, the nationalist belief is that you have to unite people. And that is a need of the hour. But as soon as that nationalist moment has passed, you will ask questions about that nationalist assimilation. In the same way that you can ask questions about Dayanand Saraswati. He is translating the Vedas for a specific reason. You can ask questions of Mr. Gandhi and say that your assimilation of non-violence is not true always. I mean, Upinder Singh's fantastic book, The Political Violence in Ancient India, decimates all understanding of India being a land of peaceful quietude and all of that. So, but was Mr. Gandhi wrong? Are we going to blame Mr. Gandhi and say that he was wrong with his idea of non-violence? He was not wrong. He was strategizing at one point. Was Mr. Bhagat Singh wrong to call himself an atheist? No, he was strategizing at that point. So in the same way, I think Asmita should not take us to the path of undue, uncritical celebration. It should take us to a place where we assimilate historical differences. In other words, we must see how an object, an event in history is shaped with battles and arguments to and fro, both sides of an argument. So, and this is where I think 15th and 17th centuries become important, because 15th and 17th century are the true times in the recent past, it's not too long ago, where we genuinely see the way in which various elements of folk legends, Vedic Brahmanism, Puranic legends come together to create an Odia identity, which will slowly take shape over the 19th century, and we carry that burden until now. That is, we carry those ideas till now. All the stereotypes, good and bad, are...
Give us an example. Just one second, I'll just switch off the fan, I think. Sorry, this was a very interesting portion. I wanted to make sure I captured it.
So, for example, Lakshmi Purana. I mean, we celebrate the idea of Shriya Chandaluni's house being visited by Lakshmi. But that comes out of a specific anti-caste stance that the Odia poets took at that point. That means that the radical potentiality of Lakshmi taking a stand for her devotees instead of her husband tells you a certain kind of, gives you a certain kind of understanding of how the female god who doesn't have a Purana so Lakshmi Purana doesn't have any Sanskrit version of it. She has not gotten a dedicated Purana on her. But that caught somebody's mind, and that he is retelling this story to make a point. So that is clear. That means that what else do you look for in poetry? You look for creative engagement with truth, right? So this is the truth that he's rendering in front of us. And when we are proud of our Lakshmi Purana, we must be proud of these elements. We must not limit ourselves to the ritualistic aspect of it. We must see underneath the philosophical workings of it. That is our culture. That is what I am proud of in my culture. That my culture allowed the mobility of a goddess who was also sort of had to go through that whole scenario of threatening the husband to break away from patriarchy. Although it's a love story, it's a certain kind of reconciliation between Jagannath and Lakshmi. But that is, I think, the true radical potentiality of our culture. That element. Or Shunyavad. When Bhima Bhoi writes about Shunya, and when Shunya is represented with Jagannath, that's Jagannath also represents a certain kind of Shunya. That, I think, is the radical potentiality of my culture. That my culture, and this will be too far-fetched to say, but let me make this argument. The Bengali Renaissance, which has caught on in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century, 19th, 20th century, is broadly talking about sati, widow remarriage, and all these things, banning of sati. But look at our 15th to 17th century. There is a conscious public space there. So I would expect, I'm not again saying, Mr. Gaganendra Das's soul would be hurt if I say this, but I'm not saying that our culture did it better than their culture. I'm just simply saying that why don't we look at that model of Renaissance which they are proud of, and then we look at this kind of interlocution inside a public space and we say, well, you see, this is a continuation. Our religion, our debates about the public sphere have always been contradictory. That is Asmita for me. Asmita for me is not an Orientalist past desire for a fantastic past, which is so glorious, which is so pristine that I can't raise questions about it. I will ask questions, and those questions are not dishonor. Those questions are legitimate. Only when we get to that Asmita kind of understanding, I would be happy. But what is happening now is the quest for a pure identity. Because people have moved out from here.
Right.
And people are feeling that vacuum.
Back in.
People feel that vacuum. And that vacuum is actually supplied by what I call capsule history. Actually, capsule myths. You want to look at myths as myths, and you want to be glorified by myths. But remember that myths are formed in a time.
Like the pitched battle, for instance, for me it was symbolic, like the early start of this, the early subconscious start of this was the pitched battle for Rasagolla. I'm not going into who it belongs to. What I'm saying, it's a stupid sweet dish. People should be blamed as to who made the Rasagolla because it's unimaginative and not who invented it in the first place. I can well believe that it was an accident of Chhena being left over for too long and, kind of mixing with something. It was the most, to me, my mind. But no, coming to, like, I'm making it facetious because it just does something about this search for authenticity, makes the most facetious and superficial become strangely profound.
Yeah. And we lose a lot of time. I'm not going to comment on that Rasagolla thing. I really never followed. I never followed what even happened. I know that this was a GI tag battle, but I also do know that there was something about...
As if that settles the debate. That settles any debate in the world. GI tag.
But what happens, I must tell you this, that I've also felt it. What this discourse does is it does create a certain kind of discord and animosity.
Yeah.
I do feel myself in Calcutta any day.
Yeah.
I feel myself in Calcutta. I enjoy, every time I go to Calcutta, I meet my Odia Bhainas in the Hindu Pice hotels, what is called the Hindu hotels.
Right.
And there's a Balesurya or a Bhadrakiya guy who I talk to in Odia, and he's surprised, and we talk for 20 minutes after eating, and I come back. I love Calcutta. The entire idea of Kolkata and Bhubaneswar and all that is completely a farce in my head. But what I do think is that when we divide these things like regional identities, we forget that our transactions go back way back into the history. Our transactions, we have always been a society of transactions. yes, of course, let's not forget that the Bengalis of that generation wanted to take jobs here and they've said all those things. But there are also Gaurashankar Rais and Radhanath Rais. I don't know where to put them. Of course, they're Odias. But let's not be too limited. But this vacuum of identity
In
is
fact, I think Utkal Association identifies its members as Utkaliyas.
Utkaliyas, yes.
And
It's a,
Utkaliyas meant that whoever sees
Yeah.
Odisha as a whole,
yeah.
rather than being a linguistic, like whether your mother tongue is
Yeah.
Odia or not.
Yeah.
It was just, so for me, just if I want you to respond to this point, and I'm very curious to see how you would, kind of see it. The dialectic which is set of being critical or being proud, to me, kind of has another center, not because I am proud of being Odia or because I'm critical of being Odia. There is no qualification to it. I just am.
Yeah.
Because it just is, like Bhakti, it just is. It's a personal thing.
Yeah.
It's something which cannot be taken back by any kind of legislation, any kind of linguistic norm. It just is. So for me, Asmita is creating this dialectic which will always, the present discourse in Asmita, there can be obviously, like we have talked about, various kinds of way of looking at Asmita. But the present discourse for me tries to find the authentic, which, if I'll go a little mahima on this, which will be a little bit of a shunya. There will be nothing that can be enunciated.
Yeah.
That may be there. It's going to that Gödel's, theorem, incompleteness theorem.
Yeah.
There are in certain things, a certain system, there are certain things which are axiomatic, which are true, but within that system cannot be proved to be true using the precepts of that, axioms of that system. And I think where you belong and who you are part of that axiom, which cannot be proved within that set.
True. And not only that, but Asmita also should, what is happening is, I think there's a large scale rootlessness that is being, so when do you want to become something? Why do you want to enunciate what you are?
And also that rootlessness, I agree, because it like makes us self-conscious.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the Asmita debate, that came about when a very popular politician, Modi ji, says that we are losing Asmita. I think that triggers something which was already there in parallel, but just the fact that it can trigger, that somebody can say, look, you are losing who you are, and suddenly making this panic attack is that, am I losing who I am? Bureaucrats from other states en masse coming into, I was happy for 4 terms or 5 terms with a mixed crowd, with a cosmopolitan crowd, and getting things done very efficiently. And suddenly I'm like, but was that the price that I paid? Yeah. So it's like that self-conscious, interrogation, especially because you haven't dealt with that question enough.
Yeah. And alongside that is this whole business of forgetting that the Cholas ruled us, who were rooted in Tamil.
Yeah.
Or the other...
Karnataka at least.
The Godavari, Kaveri region. Yeah. And not only that...
The Eastern Gangas.
The Eastern Gangas were from the Chola dynasty. And that we have always had
partly Akosala and Chola.
And we have had a relationship with them. But then, this is what happens when we forget our historical...
And Eastern Gangas being the biggest heroes of the...
But now things have gone bad. Things have gone different. Now, Kopalendra Deva is the biggest hero.
Oh.
Because you have to, you see.
So I'm waiting for Kharavela to take over, man.
Yes.
Or the Bomakaras to take over. They were a fun lot.
They were a fun
lot.
But when we see, and this is what Romila Thapar constantly argues and constantly cautions, is that, remember that history is not about truth. It's not truth. It's the reflection of the past, so much so that it can help construct our present. And the battle between the nationalist and a person like me would be very simply put the fact that for them, history is opium. They want to have that and want to see everything in the light of nationalism.
But not too much opium. They are also connoisseurs of it.
In
the sense that too much opium and contradicting. You don't want, ek nashe pe dusra nasha nahi chadhana chahiye. So there's also limiting conditions that they bring because it is an intoxicant.
Yes, yes. And for me, it is to, I mean, for some of us who don't want to fall into that pit, we try and look at it from another perspective. We try and say that, oh, well, this is the material, this is the raw material in which the rationalist constructed this object. Now, this object can also be questioned. And then we can go to another object. So we can see the transformation of things. So for them, I don't know who this them is, but whoever this them is, for them, these are ossified categories. That they want to limit their imaginations to the best of their nationalist readings. Like, for example, you have the Champu by, blame my timid memory at this point, Kisora Chandranana Champu. Yes, Kisora Chandranana Champu. Baladev Ratha.
Right.
There are many places where he uses Persian words.
Right.
Ho Champu, if I'm not wrong, uses a word called Hamar. Hamar is Hamare.
Give us a background into Champu.
It's another form of Odia literature. It comes up in the same time that I'm talking about, in the centuries after the thing. Champus are sung usually. প্রত্যেকটা অক্ষরে গোটে গোটে গান গীত মানে ওড়িয়া অ্যালফাবেট অ রুক্ষ যায় ক রুক্ষ যায়. How do you read that? Odia is also, you see what I'm trying to say? There's something called Odia, but of course there will be Persian pilpering. Mind you, Persian was the language. So what I'm trying to say is, ଆମେ ହାମାରଟାକୁ କ'ଣ କରିବା? ତାକୁ ବାଦ ଦେଇଦେବା ନା ସେଟା ଆମ ଓଡ଼ିଆ ଅସ୍ମିତାର ଖଣ୍ଡନ ପଡୁଛି? କ'ଣ କରିବା ସେଠି ଆମେ? ଯଦି ବେଶୀ ନ ଭାବିବା ବାଦ ଦେଇଦେବା, ଯଦି ବେଶୀ ଭାବିବା ଆମେ ଭାବିବା ଯେ ବା ପ୍ଲୁରାଲିଟି ତ ଥିଲା. I mean, Sarala, for example, composed in other languages than Odia.
Yeah, perfect. He was a polyglot.
Yes.
Naturally. He lived in Vrindavan, must have known.
He came from Vrindavan, he composed in Brajabali. Brajbhasha. I always get confused between Brajabali and Brajbhasha, and my professor shout at me. But what do we do? আমি কি বাদ দিয়ে দেবো সেটাকে? আমি যদি বাদ দিয়ে দেবো তাহলে গোটে পুরা অংশ is gone.
Right.
So it's like saying that, so should we actually make defunct any Odia who is speaking English? It's the same question, because Persian is English of the middle century.
And the English that a lot of us are speaking, it's closer to what you might argue. Where is the meta center to that? Word.
But
if you are going against somebody,
yes, or
I don't know which language against.
I mean, I'm happy with any pronunciation.
You're so damn clear, man.
I mean, I'm as long as you speak any language, I'm fine. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm
not against the pronunciation.
No. But
I'm just saying this.
When somebody corrected me recently saying that columnist kahin kahucho, seta columnist.
I mean, there is an interesting prospect like a lot of other places.
Na, at least columnist hochi. Mu bhule dedi kohta ni columnist. You get it. So we're all in this space of sort of.
I love it. And why be so self-conscious about it?
Exactly.
Because a lot of people, English is spoken in various accents.
Absolutely. I mean, I hear my Iranian friends speaking English and it takes me 20 minutes to understand it.
And that's a prospect of decolonizing. That's the real prospect of decolonizing.
Yeah.
If you're saying go back, and to everybody en masse, if you're saying go back, learn Odia, learn Hindi, learn Malayalam, that's one way, but that's really a little bit, I see an elite, kind of suggestion in that, because English is so empowering to a lot of people, and we just need to be less self-conscious about how we use it. And we've all been made fun of while we were growing up, how we pronounce Vostok,
and garage.
And
I mean, not only that, but in America you have the Iranians. I mean, my friends,
and the Italians also.
The Iranians actually come and compliment Indians and say, I've seen that with my friends and my other people, that they say that, how do you guys know so much English?
Yeah.
Because they don't learn English, they learn Persian.
Yeah.
And then I'm telling them, for example, Makhmal. I know my Hindustani and my Urdu a little bit, or my Persian a little bit with my... And they're like, well, you guys, you know Makhmal?
Yeah.
The film director Makhmal Baf?
Yeah.
I mean, I got to know from a friend, and then I talked to this Iranian guy, and then he's like, oh, you know Makhmal? And Makhmal is a specific kind. So from my base in Odisha, with my Persianate heritage of Baladev Ratha or Fakir Mohan, I can make conversation with a Persian guy there from Iran. Is that not making Odia a global thing? But here the debate is about, should we edit out the Persian with the Hindustani word?
And a good symbol of that is Fakir Mohan.
Yeah.
That we have somebody at the center, right at the center, who was accused as somebody to be at the fringes and really could do both, which is to say that maybe other generations don't need to do both. This is probably a important prospect to learn, that you don't have to be anxious to be everything at the same time. You can do it if you want to.
You don't have to be anxious about being pure. There's nothing called pure. And anybody who looks for pure is looking at the impossible. There's nothing called pure.
The origins aren't that.
There might be, there might be some origin that you can go back to, but there might
especially if you mean or pure as singular.
Yeah. If you mean pure as untouched by anything. There's nothing called untouched by anything. I mean, you might call Odia untouched by anything, but it is touched by things more than you know. And it will always be touched by things more than you know. Today, when I hear my younger family members speak in Odia, they barely speak Odia. They're like, ମୁଁ ଯାଇଥିଲି ସେଟାକୁ ଇସ୍ତେମାଲ କରିପାରିଲିନି ଆଉ ତାପରେ आ गए वापस.
You should listen to one of the Odia songs, private album songs. Mo dil ko tu. These are. But I find it fantastic. I mean, it's tatsam, as some people would call it. But
I don't know what to say to it, but I do know that that's at least speaking in Odia, because people these days speak in Hindi more than anything else.
But my generation, I mean, I'm talking about again, I have talked about this in previous guests, that my generation is really least, should be at least, which they are not, least self-conscious about imitation.
Yeah.
Because so much has been achieved by our generation of Odias, by imitating modernity, that, and so many of the subsequent generations have really the kind of actually intellectual, physical, economical wit that they have right now is because of the backs of so many people who were not very self-conscious in imitating or trying to recreate. Or I don't see it as a problem. I see it as a stage, like being a teenager where you're trying to figure it out. 20s, you look at your 20s at my age, which is, I'm in my 40s. I look at my 20s and my teenagers as a very self-conscious period. But I can see its importance in, kind of gathering that entire image. You can't do this. You can't have an identity without going through some kind of crisis.
No, that's true. And also the imitation has gone to farther heights, because what has happened with imitation is that you have completely, there's a complete loss of selfhood. That is, there is no selfhood to hold on to. At this point, why is Pokhala Divas so important suddenly?
Why do you have to?
It should be important. It should be important. I'm not denying. But what I'm trying to say is, when I was growing up, and I'm not too grown up, I'm 27. When I was growing up 10, 15 years ago, there was no scene of any Odianess anywhere. I mean, there was...
But we had a rich tradition. So the tradition itself, itself, wasn't necessarily an identity.
Yeah.
It was a lived tradition, like you're saying. But not always does tradition always ossify into an identity.
But that is the exact point that you hit. What has happened is, let me reformulate that vacuum question. What is happening is that, and this is a well-theorized space in historical studies, is that when you leave the living tradition, you tend to archive it. So what Odias are going through is a deep anxiety, and this, my friends from all over the world will love it, because I'm being candid. But what I'm trying to say is, Odias are going through an anxiety of not being able to live their traditions.
Right. Wow.
And thereby they must posit that livingness exterior to their life and celebrate it. Mane, se pure jiba in a community affair, gadi re thokka mono, chalo jiba chalu thiba, and borsa hothubo, and orthonala pakharu jaiki bato mangala pakhare mundia mari ki se jo pura process ta, not for the sake of who is seeing you from outside, but that process is governed by your parents and you're doing it. You learned it.
Yeah.
That is not there anymore.
Right.
Now what is there is a self-conscious practice of nostalgia, which is no more related to your life. You see what I'm trying to say? So there is a way in which there is a third person which is seeing you. May it be social media, may it be YouTube views, may it be Odia, Asmita. So everybody is watching you do it. There's no way that you archive that process. That it is, if it lives, it lives. If it dies, it dies. Then you have something new to come up to. Money, it's more like...
a performance story?
It's more like, it's like you let the organic come out, you know. I mean, it's like what would happen in terms of Jivananda Das in Bengal, for example. You have this whole tradition of the Rabindric age, and then people trying to be part of that Rabindric age. Suddenly you have other people and they're like, no, it doesn't work anymore. The aesthetics don't work. I can't talk about my life with my Vedantic metaphors. But the love has changed. Let's change with it. And the tragicness has to come into it. Love is no more that pure elision or pure merging with the soul. Love is modern, love is tragic, love is hurtful. So what it does is it tries to capture the age. I don't think we have found it. But well, there are certain things that you find. I mean, like rap songs on Jagannath, which catch on. Brilliant things. It's trying to. So I think we need to do that kind of stuff. And instead of that, what we do is, I am not saying don't hold on. I'm the most traditionalist in that sense, that I want to hold up to the past. But the past must be held up critically, thereby giving way to the future. So I'm not going to... What we have become is we have become pundits giving judgments on the future and past. We are saying that eta asabhya, eta sabhya. But if there is sabhya asabhya debate nahi, eta hoche gote continuation. So if we have to let that flow, only then can we can let it flow only when we know what histories are. We are still in the idealized world. And my generation, I don't know. My generation, I think, is completely become... my generation can't distinguish between fiction and history, myth and history. My generation is living in a mythological world of that, the grandeurs of myth. But you can't live in the grandeurs.
Anurag Kashyap put it very beautifully. He said that the new generation of filmmakers have been born in trial room.
Oh yes.
So when they see movies, they have references for movies to make movies. They don't see movies as a reflection of real life.
Brilliant. Yes, that's a brilliant way of putting it.
And that's a way that we are looking at history. A story within a story. It cannot happen because the precepts of the story that we have originally heard
happens in a context.
Happens in this.
Yes, and happens in a specific context. It happens within that specific time and space where there is a push and pull going on.
Right.
So what happens in Odisha thereby is you have a nice little setup of orthodoxy, and then you have these tiny little pockets of resistance. Yeah, I mean, so what is happening is we have pockets of resistance. For example, the rationalist movement in Bhubaneswar. This is a raging movement, and I have not met anybody from there. I give them my moral support. But what is happening is things are happening in pockets. You see, so this modernity is an interesting play out. But we have to really be conscious as to how we see our gods and how we see our myths and religion, which can happen, as I say repeatedly, moving slightly away from Asmita. Slightly. We need to be proud of our criticality. We need not be uncritically proud of what we have.
I'm putting in a very profane way that you may have, like when in the search for Asmita or anything which you're looking at in the past or in the present, if you're looking for a sense of self that is externally already made by history or some other force, which you have not been a part of, I don't think it's philosophically possible. That's what I meant, that don't turn into a complete...
I think that's a very nice way of putting it.
Is that if you are not a participant in it, if you have not thought it through, it's not your self, authentic self waiting outside for you to reach out and find it. You have to somehow, if you are searching for yourself, you have to participate in it.
But also philosophically speaking, I mean, this is a very interesting point, but also philosophically speaking, see what's happening. I mean, you have from the 16th century, 17th century onwards in the Western world, a quest to move away from any kind of logical belonging to a community, right? People don't want to belong to religion. People don't, I mean, the whole Enlightenment philosophy based after Kant is about searching for the individual. That is, your actions have to be morally good and ethically good, not because some religion dictates it, but because you choose to be that good or whatever, right?
The a priori principle there.
today somehow in the larger global landscape, we are formulating and we are trying to return en masse into some shelter called identity. This is the rise of identity politics, right? We do not want to test waters on our own terms. That is what Yagendra Yadav calls that there is too much clothing on our truth. We have to make the truth naked. What is happening? We are wearing too many clothes. ମାନେ ମୁଁ ସମ୍ବଲପୁରୀ ପିନ୍ଧିନି ବୋଲି ବୋଧେ ମତେ ଆଜି 3-4 ଜଣ କହିବେ ଯେ ତମେ ଇକତ କାହିଁକି ଏ ଯୋଉ ମାନେ ଇଣ୍ଡିଗୋ କାହିଁକି ପିନ୍ଧୁଛ ତମେ ସମ୍ବଲପୁରୀ କାହିଁକି ପିନ୍ଧନି ତାପରେ ଜଣେ କହିବେ କୋଟ ଫାଡ କାହିଁକି all of that is fine. I will wear all of that. I will make ଖୋର୍ଦ୍ଧା ଗାମୁଛାର ବି ଗଞ୍ଜି ବନେଇକି ପିନ୍ଧିବି. I will do all of that. But the problem is that that's not the only way to be an Odia.
That's not the weather. You can't wear so many clothes in Odisha.
What I'm trying to say is that
there's only so many things you can
but
wear.
ଧୋତି ପିନ୍ଧିଲେ ପୁଣି ଆପଣଙ୍କୁ ମଲ୍ କୁ ଯିବାକୁ ଦେବେନି. ମୁଁ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଧୋତି ପିନ୍ଧିକି ଯାଏ ମାନେ ମସ୍କୋ ମଲ୍ ଭିତରକୁ ଯିବାକୁ ଦିଅନ୍ତି ଯେ ଅନାନ୍ତି ଏମିତି ସେମିତି ଆପଣ କୋଉଠୁ ପଳେଇ ଆଇଲେ ନା ଧୋତି has become something else. ଧୋତି ପିନ୍ଧିବା ତ ଓଡ଼ିଆ ଲୋକଙ୍କର ଧର୍ମ. ଆମେ ତ ଧୋତି ପିନ୍ଧୁଥିଲୁ. ଧୋତି ପିନ୍ଧିଲେ କାହିଁକି ଅନୁଭବ ତ ତମେ ଗୋଟେ ମଡର୍ନ ଫ୍ୟୁଜନ ଓଡ଼ିଆ କ୍ରିଏଟ୍ କରୁଛ. ସେଇ ମଡର୍ନ ଓଡ଼ିଆଟା ହଉଛି ଛାଡ଼ କଣ କହିବା ଗୋଟେ ସ୍ପେସିଫିକ କାଇଣ୍ଡ ଅଫ ଓଡ଼ିଆ ଯୋଉମାନେ ବାବୁ ଆଉ ବାବୁ କହିଲେ ମୁଁ କହୁଛି IAS ଅଫିସର.
Also to I'm just remembering the joke because of the Odia. So, I think that the Fakir Mohan thing still haunts me. I think just the generation may not have found its idiom.
Yeah.
They are searching for it in the wrong place, like with Shavana Athagun. Once you find the idiom, actually the idiom sometimes tells you the story other than the other way around, the story telling you what the idiom should be.
I mean, who is an Odia? I mean, there are so many other questions then, right? There is a whole Posko Andolan hela. ସେଠି ଗୋଟେ ପ୍ରକାରର ଓଡ଼ିଆଙ୍କର ଛେଦନ ହେଲା. ପୋସ୍କୋ ଆସିଲା, ସାଉଥ କୋରିଆ ଆସିଲା, ସେଠି ଗୋଟେ ପ୍ରକାର ଲ୍ୟାଣ୍ଡ ଜମି ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ ହେଲା. ଚାଷୀ ମୂଲିଆ ଆଦିବାସୀ ସଂଘଙ୍କର ଗୋଟେ କୋରାପୁଟ ନାରାୟଣପାଟଣା ସେଠି ଗୋଟେ ପ୍ରକାରର ମୁଭମେଣ୍ଟ ହେଲା. ତ ଆମେ କୋଉ ପ୍ରକାର ଓଡ଼ିଆକୁ ସେଲିବ୍ରେଟ କରୁଛେ ମାନେ what is the idea of Odisha?
But the discourse is what you were saying. There's a bureaucratic hold to it or a fascination of a particular kind of hold to it. And to talk about a little bit about that,
what I'm trying to say is we have orientalized our tradition. What we are doing is we are looking at Odias as outsiders would look into Odia. It's literally like if somebody
comes... We're very self-conscious as how outsiders are looking into us. Yeah.
If somebody comes to your house and you want to show them the best paintings, so your drawing room is filled with all the bigyo lokonko bahi tame jaha kinithibo tama juniya chak. Kintu bhitare ghare kon achi ke dekhu nahanti. Until it's somebody who
tinker.
So yeah. So your entire dining room or drawing room sitting room is brilliant, and you want to show them that. But you can't do that. The point is, it's ridiculous that you have this bureaucratization of process. Mane Odisha Sarkar, I mean, like any other Sarkar, is actually very curious. It wants to show itself in a specific light. So it'll have certain clothing, it'll mandate certain things on teachers, it'll mandate certain thing on babus. Babu mane ଟିକେ ଗର୍ବିତ ଫିଲ୍ କରନ୍ତି ଯଦି ସେମାନେ ସମ୍ବଲପୁରୀ ସାର୍ଟଟା ପିନ୍ଧୁଛନ୍ତି, ଟିକେ ଗର୍ବିତ ଫିଲ୍ କରନ୍ତି. ଆମେରିକା ଯାଆନ୍ତୁ କି ୟୁରୋପ ଯାଆନ୍ତୁ ସେଠି ଟିକେ
the contrast
ଟିକେ ଗର୍ବିତ ଫିଲ୍ ହୁଏ. ଭଲ ବି ମାନେ
which you are saying is a larger part that it's not part of the lived experience. It's part of the because you don't because you're doing it for a specific purpose to send. So wearing a Sambalpuri thing wouldn't be ever a signal for anything because that would be something which was always lived and very mundane. So because it's not mundane.
No, I mean it is mundane, but it also becomes an experience for the person. It becomes an experience of showing a slice of you, which is fine. We all show our slices. Right. I mean, the Europeans also do that. But we shouldn't look at ourselves with Oriental lenses. We shouldn't exoticize our own bodies, our own habits, our own rituals. We should know that this is a practice. And the practice lives until a point and then transforms. Let us give breathing space to. So what happens is then if we don't see these as practices, if somebody doesn't do it, we see it as a koruni. Se koruni kaina time place sthana kala patra bodali galani. Tenu kari se koruni. Khali boncheba ku jaiki to boncheba ni ame na. There are certain traditions which we must wipe out, which are casteist, patriarchal, sexist, misogynist.
Also the tradition that you pointed out of saying how well you know
columnist.
Sorry. Shakti. I love it.
Yeah, but
you have to.
One other tradition that we should really get go of is becoming more number of bureaucrats. Because everybody, as I was saying, Shima, the other day, everybody I meet on a dinner table who has crossed 50 was a classmate of Mr. Shaktikanta Das, the RBI governor. So, because anybody who studied in DM is a classmate of his. But we should really get...
You're really right. That's not a symbol of how our culturally...
And I'm glad we have the president and all of that.
Nothing against
it's
any of this.
It's a very happy thing. But we should really get
over it.
Yeah, get over
We were always as good.
We should get over the tradition of being an IS officer, I think.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing that the
Or
Odias...
become his Zamane.
Because we can do better things. We can be writers.
We can do so many things.
Yeah, some of the treasured writers in Odisha are actually IS officers. And I respect them. One of my idols... I'm not sarcastic at all when I say that Desa Kala Patra by Jagannath Prasad Das is, I think, one of the most brilliant novels not written in any other language. It's a fine book. It's such an experimental work. I think he's in his late 80s. I respect and revere him.
But what would you say about the countless poetry being launched at various, the countless poetry and painting exhibitions? Have you been to some of them?
Oh, no, I have. But poetry for me is one that touches my heart. And I have always been honest that I'm not going to go by name. Ezra Pound means nothing to me. T.S. Eliot means something to me. Walt Whitman means something to me. So I am very categorical about poetry. So I don't read. If I don't like it, I don't read it. But J.P. Das's poetries are fantastic. Our very own Mr. Jayanta Mahapatra, world class. That kind of poetry is, both his Odia and English poetries are breathtaking. It's unusually, I could never imagine that Mr. Jayanta Mahapatra would be that when I read him very late in life. But fabulous. So what I'm trying to say is we should... And Jayanta Mahapatra again is a very classic example. I've written about him for a while now. I've studied him. He typifies the Odia Asmita.
Really?
A Christian man born in the quiet precincts of Cuttack in Tinikonia Bagicha, in Cuttack, and stayed large part of his life in a 1,000-year-old city. As I put it, spending 100 years out of the 1,000 years in Cuttack, has never earmarked himself as an Odia, but also has earmarked himself as an Odia. He wrote poetry of Odia heartbreaks. He wrote poetry about Odia Jagannath. He wrote about Odia hunger. He wrote about the Adivasis. He typifies the Odia experience without becoming a vociferous advocate of any kind of regional subnationalism. He was also the man, let's remember, who returned his Padma Shri during the intolerance debate in 2015 and 16. He is the man for me, he is the ideal for me, who takes Odia experience to the world. He's such a calm man in his poetry as well as in his literal figure. Such a calm person. In one of the articles that I wrote about him, I said that the true inner experience that he expresses is refined in such a way that you can see a universal experience, but you can also see an Odia experience. Like, he talks about love, and he writes about how, in one of his poems, in Rain Up Writes, he talks about that, I'm butchering his poetry, but he talks about how he can't touch his wife before marriage. And that shows nothing what the French writers were writing in the 1930s, because they were cannibalistic about love and sex, right? Literally. But here is a man who's so delicately portraying it. There's an experience of love, but that's also deeply Odia, because an Odia man will not touch the wife before the marriage is over. So consummation happens only after marriage on the fourth night. And he's like talking about... So what I'm trying to say is he typified that. We are missing out on that. We don't have that anymore in the larger political landscape.
In a person, I saw that personified in Bijoy Mohanty, for example. I met him.
The actor.
I incidentally didn't like his act, though he has very illustrious career and everything. I thought it was. So when I saw his, he was shooting for something. I wasn't very keen on meeting him or something like that. But when I met him, he really personified for me. And I'm glad in certain ways that he doesn't, like Jayanta Mahapatra, he doesn't have writing for me to prove it, because some things are just are.
Yeah.
Because he was just so sophisticated and had this gentle masculinity, which is very unique to Odisha.
Yeah, yeah.
It's this gentle masculinity, which is also, there is no self-conscious boundary with being effeminate or not being, like a lot of men would say, malo, which I've seen, and you know, and he had that, but there was no kind of sense of loss of his masculinity, and we are always dealing with one of things where I grew up in the 90s. You remember the cinema and the popular culture there. Masculinity is such an important marker.
Yeah, I mean, look at Fakir and Senapati, for example. The man was actually suffering from dysentery and had apparently a very...
They're almost done with battery.
Cracking voice.
Yeah.
Somehow I remember it.
You were interrupted at a point of masculinity, yeah. That's fitting of, obviously.
No, the Odia masculinity is the thing, because Fakir and Senapati was a aging old man, and he was being cared by his his daughter-in-law, and very soft man, apparently, extremely soft and tender and like Jayanta Mahapatra.
That idiom and that version, in my kind of travel, even in the proximity of Bengal and, you know, other places, I haven't found that particular version of it, that fluid kind of, not very stuck with in anywhere else. I would like to.
It's a specific time. It's like that Bhadralok. What the Britishers have done with Bengalis, they call them non-masculine, right? This sense of. I mean, if you meet Jayanta Mahapatra, you will see it. I mean, he's dead, but you could see it in his eyes. There was a certain tenderness which went beyond the folds of. It is a feminine tenderness, actually, but it's embodied by a man.
But it's just that now we think of it as feminine.
Yeah, we do.
We wouldn't think of it in that way during
the times.
During the times,
and that kind of embodiment gives you a. I mean, for example, Sarala Das was a man. His name is Sarala because he is a bhakta of Sarala. So you have Hindu goddess's name given to young men, like,
and vice versa. My
Virojanandana.
My eye was Sarojbala.
And then you have Prafulla, a woman named Prafulla in my family. So it is an interesting dynamic between the masculine and the feminine in our tradition.
I think in our search for, if we are searching for a hyperbolic or a very emphatic kind of identity, that I fear will somehow not be accommodated at any point. Very difficult.
Very difficult.
Isn't it? Like the symbols typically get more militant, more assertive, more, and I wouldn't say militant, but more assertive and more, you know, garv se kaho hum, whatever, hey, fill in that blank. So that doesn't fill up with that quiet, ruminating, critical, but also, you know, like you said, accommodating, not resisting, but also is aware of their own center. That kind of identity will be not be accommodated in that conversation.
Yeah, and there's also distinct Odia humor. Forgetting a very distinct taste of humor that and sarcasm that comes, which again you will see in Govinendra Das's lectures, right? This kind of servileness. Like there is a certain way in which we know. I mean, there's a certain kind of self-effacement that we practice,
right?
Which apparently many people say that came to their was a reason for their downfall. But I see it as a virtue than a vice. That there is there's a way in which you can gel well with anything. You can become a king, which is not you, and that kind of flexibility that we had is going, and thereby what we're having is a very staunch, strict figurine, which embodies a certain kind of what do you call it? Militarized persona, which is more like, I will be this. Eta mu, eta him, mu heki mein phasi wali. But our tradition is entirely about eta mu no he. Mane, mu patito, mu jobano, salabe ko jenti koithile. Mu ekta. Mane, it's a, we are a tradition, again, coming from Bhakti, we are a self-effacing tradition. I mean, if you read Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry, it's always self-effacing. You don't know who the self is. Hundreds and hundreds of poems about, I'm standing in front of the mirror, I don't know who I am. I don't know who this is. I don't know where I am. Am I this? Am I not? Self-doubt. Self-doubt is something that we're putting in the back burner. We're like, can't be doubtful about ourselves. Why should we not be doubtful about ourselves? I mean, the whole idea is to be doubtful about it. The maturity
and be doubtful about others, which is not a fair trade.
Which is, and we're not being doubtful about ourselves, but about others. But and this is also the dynamic between the self and the other, right? I mean, this is again going a little bit into philosophy. I'm reading Emmanuel Levinas these days, and Levinas puts it very brilliantly. Levinas says something about the idea of the face. Okay, so Levinas says that the face. Levinas is a 20th century French philosopher. He says that the face is the face pierces out of the crowd and beckons us to be recognized. In other words, that God manifests in a face. That is, that you are looking at a face, and that is when you realize you exist. So the human, the other, other is the place where your self is consolidated. So what we are doing now is we don't want the other. We want homogenized faces. We want one thing. And if we bend over backwards to find one thing, then who are we? Then
we'll not find ourselves.
Because that is what is happening. What we're doing is maybe
terrific way of.
So, and this is coming from Christian metaphysics. If you look at what is called Hindu metaphysics, plurality has always been the case. I mean, we've always sought differences more than unities because we three were different. We're very different people. I'm not only talking about jati differences. I'm talking about differences in terms of spiritual paths. I mean, how many of us today can differentiate between a yogi, the path of a yogi, the path of a saint who practices Utkarya Vaishnava japa? These are all different paths to salvation. We are not differentiating these things. So these are all encoded in our traditions. We must not treat them as ossified categories. We must see them as different paths to doing life. And once again, Puri gives you that freedom. Puri, at least in the early centuries, gave you that freedom to look into difference. And again, I said 15th to 17th century is what we need to go back to and see how our Jagannath was so many things. Buddhists and Shaivites and all of these people lay claim on that God. And we need to see differences at Chha, not make it a unitary thing. That's all. More or less.
That's a fantastic point and a fantastic point to probably end our conversation. I think that been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.